Hello, I'm Natalia Romanova. The most important topic of the day is the situation across the country with the attempt to use the National Guard in the so-called sanctuary cities. We have Greg Rogers, who is a former undercover FBI agent. So let's ask a few questions about his opinion on what is going on.
My pleasure.
How common is it for firearms to appear at peaceful demonstrations, and how does that affect the work of federal agents?
It's very common. Most of the states in the United States have what are called concealed carry permits. So adults can basically get a license to carry a weapon with them in a manner that law enforcement can't see it. It's very concerning at these types of events because even though a private citizen may be well-intentioned, if they pull out a firearm, law enforcement doesn't know if that's a good person or a bad guy. So it's very concerning. And sometimes, again, private citizens, even though they're well-intentioned, might try to take the law into their own hands, and that can often lead to a very dangerous situation for everybody.
How do the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security typically coordinate with local law enforcement when protests erupt? And can the National Guard genuinely help maintain order in cities like Portland?
For any major event, even if it's a huge sporting event or an entertainment event for speakers or things like that, local law enforcement meets with, there's pre-operation planning. So local law enforcement meets with federal law enforcement. They decide on security, the amount of security that's appropriate, who's going to be involved. There'll be what's called a command post that is set up. One of those agencies will be in charge of that command post. So there's a lot of preoperative planning. The issue always becomes who's making the decision about how much security is needed. For instance, at a normal event, it's usually left up to local law enforcement. So unless they ask for federal help, the FBI or DHS doesn't just normally show up. We're there when our assistance is requested. The National Guard in Portland, that's going to be interesting because we're not used to that in the United States. We're not used to having military forces on the streets. So might it be helpful? The answer's yes. I think it would cause criminals to not be acting out on their plans while the military folks are there, but they're only going to be there for a very short amount of time. So it might be a temporary fix, but that's just not something we're used to. We're not used to having armed, soldiers in uniform marching around our city streets. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out.
What poses the greatest concern for federal authorities? Armed demonstrators, suspicious devices, or potential provocations?
Unfortunately, we're seeing a real upswing in very violent activity occurring at protests. So it's become very, very concerning. And in the last couple of years, that's really starting with the George Floyd riots a few years back. That's something that we're going to have to deal with. We haven't been handling it very well, and protesters again can show up armed, and in some states, Montana and Utah, for instance, they're called open carry states. So it's perfectly legal to be walking around with a weapon. We had recent event here in Salt Lake City where a young man at a gay pride parade was wearing an M16. I mean, just walking around with a rifle. That's unfortunately legal. So that's a huge concern. Law enforcement, we're just learning how to deal with that because this is all sort of new, and we're every major event, we're having to learn how to deal with it.
How does the FBI assess the risks following recent violent incidents at ICE facilities, such as the one in Dallas?
That's another interesting question because the FBI doesn't traditionally provide any kind of security for other federal law enforcement agencies, again, unless we're asked. Where the FBI is going to be much more involved in those in the future is an attack on a federal law enforcement facility for political reasons like that is an act of what under the federal criminal statutes is called domestic terrorism. So the FBI does work those investigations. So we'll be working domestic terrorism cases targeting groups that are attacking ICE facilities. So we'll have undercovers, informants, and agents working those cases. So it may be the case that we have a heads up or know in advance that something's about to happen, and we'll certainly act on it before it does. So the FBI will be working those cases, not in the sense of providing ICE added security. That's ICE's responsibility and DHS, and they'll be upping their security at their facilities. But the FBI will be working those cases and trying to target them before they ever happen.
Thank you very much, Greg Rogers. Currently, he is a professor of Utah Valley University and a former undercover FBI agent. We discussed in depth the situation of use of the National Guard across the country. I'm Natalia Romanova. Thank you for watching.